You are listening to Abnormal Spaces.
I'm Donnie.
I'm Ryan.
In this podcast, we discuss conceptual realities, the researchers, authors, and explorers who describe and define them, as well as our personal experiences in these abnormal spaces. In this episode, we discuss the act of channeling, the channelers who can access the Akashic record from the ether, and the lessons, warnings, and glimpses into alternate realities they have shared. So we've talked a lot about people like Dolores Cannon and Edgar Cayce and Robert Monroe. And one of the things that Dolores Cannon is able to do is a form of channeling. And Robert Monroe had Rosalind McKnight, who did some channeling as well. And so I thought maybe we should talk a little bit about different channelers that have been in history, et cetera, and some of their methods and some of the things they do. And I guess real quick before we get too deep into it, I like to make a delineation between channelers and mediums, just so like the audience is on the same page as me. So mediums will have a conversation with an entity that isn't in what we believe to be our reality, whereas channelers will allow that entity that we believe is not in our current reality to inhabit them and speak through them. So very big difference to me, might be a minute difference to others, but regardless, I think it's important to
It's a very good explanation.
Oh, thanks. So, people over millennia have discussed concepts or visions or things like that have just quote unquote come to them. And, I think of like the Apostle John when he wrote the book of Revelations. All of that was a dream state that he was in, and it was a vision of the future, essentially. And then you have people like Nostradamus, and then, of course, Dolores Cannon speaking to Nostradamus, which is really interesting. But yeah, so essentially people allow somehow another entity to speak through them. And then other people either translate that or, try to understand what it was they were communicating. And to me, one of the most interesting ones is Rosalind McKnight. When you hear her voice change in those recordings, it just seems otherworldly. It just seems like there's zero faking it. It seems very genuine to me.
She had the EEG hooked up to her as well.
Yeah.
I don't know how many times I've said it. In my opinion, that needs to be commonplace for any of this stuff. Not all the time, but just to prove bullshit, basically. Anybody can say they're a channeler.
Right.
But if your brain waves say that you are in either a heightened state or some kind of altered state, then, okay, I can get with that even more.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That's the thing. Skeptics don't like to take things on faith. We want some kind of proof. And although I believe there isn't proof for everything, or at least we wouldn't understand the proof that we see, there is some proof like that. And, she was clearly in a different state.
Yeah, I mean, that's really it as far as the technology that we have to be able to measure electrical signals to show that you're not in a beta waking state. I don't know, these channelers, seems like they go up to like gamma,
yeah,
and then they drop back down into like delta or something. It's like back and forth or some kind of thing like that. Okay, so there's a channeler named Daryl Anka who channels a supposed entity named Bashar, which is extraterrestrial. And, you know, I don't know how I feel about all this stuff, and like I'm not crazy big into channeling and all that. We just kind of talked about that before we started recording. But I think it is really interesting because sometimes the voice does change, and even in different sessions when you watch videos, sometimes it'll be way thicker and way weirder, and then sometimes it'll be normal, like it will be his voice more than like some kind of extraterrestrial voice or whatever, you know. But the information that comes through and how unbroken it is really amazing to me.
Yeah.
Because I can barely even talk on this podcast.
Right.
And, you know, I'm not a great speaker anyway. So, you know, there's that. but I don't know. But it really boggles my mind because the amount of study that you would have to do to not mess up, it seems like it would be a really daunting task.
Yeah.
Especially talking in front of like 500 people or 1,000 people or whatever, like all the time.
Right, yeah.
I mean, and I get it. People are very talented.
Sure.
So I don't know.
Yeah. Well, the ones that always strike me are the ones where it was something they didn't agree with in their waking life. You know, Edgar Casey comes to mind.
Totally.
But also that Helen Schuckman and the A Course in Miracles. That kind of channeling was written, and I can't remember the term for that, but there's a term for when you just like take a pencil or pen and paper and just start writing.
Automatic writing.
Yeah, automatic writing. That's it. Yeah. So she was an atheist, and she had a dream. And in that dream, she was essentially instructed to just write. And then so she just started writing the next day or day after, whatever. She had a work partner, and they were at odds a lot because he was a believer and she wasn't. And anyway, a lot of what she wrote about God, but where she was coming from was more of, you know, like kind of what we talk about all the time, just the singularity of it all. The one consciousness. And in fact, a lot of Christians had a problem with it because whoever she was channeling said that the creator and the created are one and the same. And to me, that makes sense. But apparently at the time, it was mid-70s, a lot of Christian groups had a big problem with that. And they thought that she was being seduced by satanic influences.
Oh, of course.
Of course. Yes. Yeah, but here's the crazy thing. A lot of what was in that book mirrored a lot of what Jesus said. Not just Jesus, but Buddha and you know, you can't have all these material attachments. You have to see everything as all one. And so I'm like, okay, there's a lot of overlap with the teachings of Jesus. Yet we have Christians saying, no, this is demonic.
Well, Christians and Jesus have nothing to do with each other.
Anymore, it seems that way, yeah.
I don't think it ever was that way. You know, I hate talking about Jesus. Not because I don't like Jesus. I'm sure he was a swell fellow. But because it's like the life of Brian.
Right, yeah.
If you look into that stuff, he hated organized religion.
Right.
He was against all of that stuff. And what do you do when somebody, you know, is doing extraordinary things or healing people or speaking in ways and freeing people's minds up and all of this? Well, what do you do? Well, you put them up on a pedestal and then you create a religion.
Right, yeah.
And that's just Buddhism. That's all of it.
Right, yeah.
None of the figures that had these massive followings wanted to create that. They weren't even like in the stream of this.
Right.
They were non-dual.
Right.
There was no Jesus to him.
Right.
And for whatever reason, he could only speak in weird parables, which makes it worse.
Right.
He's like, you know, my Father in heaven and all this stuff. He's just basically talking about the great I am mystery that is consciousness.
Yeah.
And he calls it my Father.
Right.
You know, he says all this stuff. If the Christians, and no offense, I mean, like, you can believe whatever you want and it probably will come true. You know, after this life, you know, like, or whatever. And that's cool, but it just seems very stifling whenever you start to make all these negatives out of something that was originally this pure, insane message of non-duality.
Yeah. Well, and radical love, you know?
Yeah, love that we don't understand. Unconditional love.
Right.
We have conditional love. No matter what anybody says, you have conditional love.
Sure, yeah.
That's because that's all we can know.
Right. Some people have transactional love.
Yes. Yes.
And, it's true, though. And it's kind of the way we operate for whatever reason. And that's what made the teachings of Jesus so revolutionary. And I think that's why it was taken over and modified so that it would serve the needs of the people in charge.
Control.
Right. It was too radical, you know.
Well, it was like when they found the Dead Sea Scrolls. Shit got weird.
Yeah.
Because that was some real shit. And it talked about the Essenes.
Right.
Everyone listening to this, please listen to or get the book Jesus and the Essenes by Dolores Cannon. I'm just going to say it. It's crazy. It is insane. It's very cool, and it puts a whole different spin on what you would think.
Yeah.
You know?
So that's another neat thing about channelers in general to me. And I should preface this by saying the channelers that I actually believe, which is funny. It's not, I guess it's not really fair, but they all seem to be pulling from the Akashic record, from the ether. They're pulling all of this general information that is there. And so many of their stories overlap, whether they know anything about the other people or not. Their visions for how things work and how people should be, etc. Lots of overlap. And I just find it fascinating that they're not usually talking to some deceased relative like a medium would. They're actually just pulling from this record of things that have happened, things that will happen, etc. And then they're able to explain that to people. You know, and then I think part of the reason that people have a little bit of a difficulty with channeling is because, you know, there have been some, for lack of a better term, fraudulent or people that seem to be abusing or milking it or just flat making it up. And one of the famous channelers from the 19th century was Helena Blavatsky, and I've mentioned her before. Yeah, and the thing is, you know, she came from money. She came from a lot of money, and everything she did seemed a little more performative to me, and she really wanted to kind of create a new, religion's the wrong word, but that's kind of what it was. And so she was trying to, like, bring a lot of different philosophies together, which is good, but there's something about her motivations and her upbringing that make it difficult for me to really believe a lot of what she said and did. But she also relied on a lot of other people to do a lot of work for her. So that's kind of the thing with her. But, you know, you look at some of what Dolores Cannon has done, and again, that Rosalind McKnight, I mean, the first time I heard that, it just blew my mind. Because it's got to be real. It's just got to be.
Yeah. Especially Dolores Cannon stuff, because if you look at that, a hypnotized person that can speak in a theta wave brain state and hold that is channeling.
Yeah.
They are channeling. You know, like when I did the QHHT thing, I wouldn't have thought of that as channeling or anything, but I would say that some of that experience was as real as anything I've experienced. And I heard myself talking about it.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm saying. Like, here's the thing. We talk about this all the time, but the fact of the matter is that you're not your mind and your thoughts. With that in mind, it makes it very easy to see how one could get in any kind of state. Because if you don't take yourself to be what you think you are all the time, then that means you can get out of it. It can go on, and then you can be somewhere else even.
Yeah.
It's a vibratory thing, you know. It's basically like, oh, well, here's a frequency of 12, and this being is on the frequency of 12, and now we're meeting at 12, and here we go, blah, 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 blah. But Ryan is on frequency 13, and he is somewhere different, hanging out.
Yeah.
And then Ryan wakes up, and he's like, okay, so let me hear it back.
Right, yeah.
And that's like Daryl Anka Edgar Casey was like that. Most QHHT was like that. I don't know about Rosalind McKnight. I think in her book, it even said, like, they just send her off and she goes and does whatever she wants to do.
Yeah.
And then she comes back and she's like, wow, there's all this stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Her cadence was different. The voice itself was different. Nearly everything about when she was channeling was different. And like I said, it seems so real. And then to have the monitoring, her brain monitoring that was going on. And it was under the guidance of Robert Monroe, who was very adept at going to these different planes. So, I think that's really neat. And again, the fact that they would say stuff they didn't agree with, or had no memory of saying, no knowledge of, coupled with the fact that there is some demonstrable science that there was a change in brain state. I mean, I believe it to be true. Now, what I don't believe is that it is some kind of demonic possession or some kind of evil, because I don't think good and evil enters into it at all. I think it's essentially someone opens themselves up in a way, through some meditative practice or through some change to their brain state. They open themselves up and they allow themselves to see or to experience this other state that, we in our current reality can't just see, can't just flip a switch and turn it on or off. And so I think that's really cool. And I think that there are some lessons from all of that. It reminds us, like, one, that the reality that we choose to participate in is that. It is a choice. We are choosing to participate in this reality. And you can stop at any time if you really want to.
Yes, absolutely. Here's another thing that's interesting about channeling that I think maybe this kind of reminds me of a little bit. Here we have this place called the Gerst House, and we used to go there every now and then, and they have these tablecloths that are like these kind of gingham. Is that what it's called?
Sure, because it's little boxes.
White. It's like white and
red.
Red squares, kind of like a. Anyways, I'm going way too far into this, but this is very interesting. You know those magic eye posters?
Yeah.
Okay, can you do those?
Sometimes.
So then you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
When you see the magic eye poster, that's a change of state.
Yeah.
You've altered your brain wave state.
Right.
Okay, so that's as easy as it is. It seems like it's the hardest thing in existence.
Yeah.
Until you do it.
Right.
Then you're like, oh my God, I just have to do this weird, whatever your trick is.
Yeah.
So, I don't know, we were there having dinner and I was looking at this tablecloth and my mind was just kind of going, and it did the thing that it does with the seeing eye posters, and the squares raised up about 1.5 inches, and then they were also underneath it.
Yeah.
And when I put my finger on it, I could see them go through the top You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, totally.
And I do that with my mixing board now. I do it with anything with a lot of pattern. Like, I can do it at will. Even with numbers, it's like they move together and they make these numbers that you can't understand.
Yeah, alien numbers
it's
or
like
something.
7 and 6 together. Like, they just kind of like jump around.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So I think about that when I think about something like channeling or any of this stuff. I think that it sounds like the most impossible thing ever, but it's actually a little tiny shift that you have to catch. And once you understand that catch, then that's it.
Yeah, that is a great metaphor, because for me, there is a specific trick that I do, and sometimes it doesn't work. But if I know what I'm supposed to be looking for, it's easier for me to find it.
Right.
Which is also just like all of this.
Right.
Part of it is you don't want to have too heavy a preconceived notion, because that'll make it more difficult. But if you have like an inkling of what it is you might be looking for, then sometimes it makes it easier.
Yeah, it's a relaxation and sort of a letting go into different states, and also being able to recognize when you're in a certain state. Like the state of astral projection. I recognize that state by the feeling of heaviness and the vibration that starts to creep up really subtly in my neck. And then when I notice that, you can use your mind to let it grow. You can grow it. You can make it go all over your whole body until it's so intense that you just float out. And it's the exact same thing. Have you ever, like when you're a kid, you turn circles a lot?
Oh, yeah, spin around, yeah.
And then you stand?
Yeah.
And you feel like you're separated from your body because you're so dizzy?
Right.
Well, you actually are.
Yeah.
That is a state of out-of-body experience.
Interesting.
It's really fast, but that's why, like, the Sufis, they would spin
Oh, yeah.
the whirling dervish or whatever, all that. They did that because that is a way to separate your etheric consciousness. Like, you transfer it almost. It's like you transfer your consciousness via physical movement, and then you can just plop it over there.
Oh, neat.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's cool.
It's like anytime you're dizzy or you feel like you're kind of out of body or you don't feel kind of right, or, you know, maybe you get too wasted or something and you're just kind of hovering above yourself or whatever, all that's out of body.
Yeah, true. Yeah. Well, something interesting about the magic eye thing, when I would have success with it, the rest of my vision was kind of incomprehensible or even gone a little bit. Like, all I could see was that image, you know, and not anything else, not even my hands holding the poster or whatever. Right. And I think that's really neat, because that would be very similar in that you've like replaced your model with new information, and it's almost like overwhelming, and you can only see that new information. You can't rely on your old model.
Exactly. You've tuned to a different frequency.
Yeah, yeah. So that must be what channelers are doing.
That's exactly what they're doing. I've heard it different ways. I've heard people talk about channeling like they just start talking. And the practice of it is to allow this talking to a point where by the talking you go into the meditative state or whatever the frequency switch is, and it fully forms.
Yeah.
So the practice is almost like QHHT, in where you get hypnotized and you think you're just making up a bunch of crap.
Yeah.
But when it starts to deepen, then it becomes your reality. So that's how I kind of think it sort of works. And then once you figure it out a few times, maybe you've been hypnotized like 5 or 10 times, or maybe you've meditated in this state 5 or 10 or 20 times, you know how to get there real fast.
Yeah.
And even through the information that comes through, you even get pointers on how to accelerate and what to do to even deepen that and go into it in like 3 seconds.
Wow.
Or a minute,
yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, anything that you do repeatedly, you know, you're going to get better at. So,
totally.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting.
I think that, sorry, I'm just kind of going off, but I think that it will help anyone who is interested in altered states of consciousness without, you know, taking psychedelics or anything like that, which is totally cool. I mean, I'd be totally into that if I wasn't scared shitless of it. But the things that you dismiss, so the things that people just normally dismiss about their entire day, every day, like daydreaming or different gestalts, like different points of view, or maybe like trying to see what's in between here in the wall, paying attention to the, quote, air.
Yeah, yeah.
Our brains are just trained to, like, just like the Magic Eye poster, they're trained to only see the Magic Eye image of what's happening here.
Right.
And everything that's blurry outside of it is still going on.
Sure, yeah.
And all we have to do is just unfocus from the Magic Eye images, and then we see that.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
Like, people are like, oh, you have to do this for 20 years. You have to do all... I don't think it's like that at all. I think it can be very, very fast.
Well, I think part of it, too, is learning to accept it. A big epiphany for me has been realizing how little control any person actually has over anything, and to kind of let go of that. And so I think that's a part of that, too. Like, the more resistant you are, or the more dismissive you are, the longer it's going to take to get to that state where you can do it more quickly and more freely and kind of bounce in between. And like, people, they always second guess their intuition, which is silly, really. And people that have like deja vu or whatever, they want to write it off as quickly as possible. And I get that. But the other side of that is those are also these weird little in-between states. It's the ether kind of seeping in sometimes. We have the capacity to do this. We just either don't want to, don't know we know how. For whatever reason, we just don't. And we don't.
We're busy.
Well, there's that.
You know, we're busy with this, we're busy with that, we're busy with work, we're busy with kids, we're busy with life, paying bills, and all that stuff. And that's how we are trained to be.
Right.
That's how we were raised to be. And there comes a point where, and this kind of is interesting to me, what makes one person's mind start to fire off in a direction of curiosity, almost like evolution, where the rest of the family is just like, it's almost like a sleepwalking type state or something. And that's not a diss.
Right.
It's an interesting point of view to see how people get caught up in their dogma and their beliefs so much that they don't question them ever, because they don't even know how to question them. The ability to question isn't even a thing for them. And if you say something and you're like, well, have you ever really thought about that? I mean, do you really think about what you're saying right now?
Right.
Then they get mad.
Yeah. Defensive, or
because of the belief is so strong. And it's it's really interesting to me. I'm like, how did I turn out like this? Yeah. And I should be believing in Jesus and going to a Trump rally or some shit. Like, I don't fucking know. Like, that's what I'm saying. It's like, I'm programmed for that.
Yeah. Right.
But I don't know.
Right.
It's a mystery.
It's so funny, too, the language we use for all of that. I kind of feel like the quote-unquote black sheep of my family, because I did not turn out the way I should have. Right. However, I turned out exactly the way I am, so there is no should have, shouldn't have. And, we think about, why do I have these impulses to go down these corridors of thought? Why is that important to me? And it is. I don't know why it is, but it absolutely is. And it's fascinating to me that you can have all of the same ingredients and come up with a completely different stew. It's wild.
And it's an interesting thing going back also to predestination and free will and all that, because it all ties together. I thought about this the other day. I think the deal is that predestination, that means choice is predestined.
Yes.
So, and free will is predestined.
Yes.
So no matter what you do, and no matter how you go, and no matter what you could have done or should have done, that's predetermined.
Right.
Because that's what you did.
Right. Yes. I know that's the whole trick of it all.
Yeah.
Like you said, on the surface, it's like, oh, well, I'm not piloting this meat suit.
Right.
And you're really not.
You're not.
So
You're not even the meat suit.
right. Yeah.
You're not even the pilot.
Right. I sometimes think about some art, whether it's music or poetry or whatever. Sometimes that feels like channeling. And I think that, again, you're pulling information out of the ether and pulling vibrations and patterns and whatnot and turning it into something that didn't exist before that then resonates with other people. So I feel like channeling should not have some of the negative connotations that it has because, one, most of us have done it in some form or fashion. Two, other than the, snake oil salespeople, a lot of the people that have done it and done it well clearly believe they're doing it and know that, that they're not faking it. And, we have ways of measuring that. But then also I think about like some of the odd visual patterns that are replicated throughout history, go back 1,000 years, 5,000 years, whatever. And you see these geometric designs, these fractal patterns, all these other things. And we don't know exactly where that came from. We don't know the inspiration for the artists that created those works. I have the sense that was like any other form of art where there is this consciousness that is all-encompassing, and they're able to pull from that and then communicate it. And that too is a form of channeling.
You channel whenever you bring anything that hasn't existed into existence. Like you said, art, music, where do the ideas come from? Nobody ever knows.
Right, yeah.
I mean, the greatest songwriter, the greatest artist will always refer back to this mysterious, I don't know.
Yeah. This inspiration,
right,
came from the heavens.
Like Ralph Steadman, he's one of my favorite artists of all time. He takes ink on a pen and just goes, and then makes the most awesome thing you've ever seen.
Yeah.
And he just does it over and over and over again because that first little initial thing is how he channels and gets into that state of, oh, okay, well, that's this and this is that. Yeah. I don't know what it was before I did this little ink blot.
Right.
People do that all the time, and it's because they have, quote, physical evidence of the fact that they made art or a recorded song.
Yeah.
But you can't get inside somebody's mind and be like, oh, look, there's a freaking alien that they're talking to you, right?
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, again, that goes back to society. Society will accept even if they don't like your art. So even if you make a musical piece and nobody likes it, they're still like, well, that's music and you created it.
Right.
So that's acceptable channeling because we don't call it channeling.
Well, because there's evidence physically.
And there's evidence.
And that's why the measurement of the brain waves backs it up. That gives it like a solid foundation to say, yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
I have yet to see anything about somebody in a delta wave pattern that's up and walking around. I mean, unless I just haven't seen it yet.
Yeah. I don't know how it would work.
Right. Although, I did see this video. I'm going to totally go back on what I said. I did see a video of Ken Wilber. He's another kind of like non-dual. He's all over the place, but man, I saw a video, I'll show it to you, where they put an EEG on his head, and he's just in a hotel room, and it shows it in real time. It shows his brain waves and everything, and he takes it all the way down to nothing.
Wow.
Flatlined delta. And he's just sitting there with his eyes closed. And he opens his eyes, and then it like comes back up. But that's like meditation, you know? I mean, that's what the channelers also do.
Right.
They just go into maybe like a theta where they're animated and they can speak and talk and, you know? But he just basically went into deep sleep with no thought. But he still was like just sitting up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Nostradamus, he used the candle. I'm trying to remember what all his practice was in order to get himself in that state.
I heard there was like an egg.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
He had like an egg-shaped room or something that he would go in, and he had that candle, and he would focus on that candle, and it would, I don't really know, something like that.
Yeah, something like that. And, and a lot of people dismiss those quatrains because they're so interpretable. And, I kind of understand that. Like, you can't say definitively that this particular quatrain was about JFK's assassination because it doesn't specifically say anything about JFK's assassination or whatever it is, whatever it is. Right. But yet it's the same thing. It's a person getting into a different state of consciousness or altered state from what most of us inhabit in our waking version of reality. And then they're able to bring in that other information. What's wild is the whole Dolores Cannon situation where she was talking with, was she talking with him or a disciple of his or?
Yeah, she talked with the disciple and then she got to talk to him.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I've had a lot of dreams come true. I think I even talked about the car crash dream that I had, and maybe I've talked about this before, and we can edit it out if so. But I moved from Central Florida to Central Massachusetts when I was in 8th grade, and in 8th grade, for me, the Metallica album "And Justice for All" was new.
Yeah.
It's just come out, and I really liked it. I was very into them at the time. And so anyway, the night before we moved, I had this dream. And in the dream, I'm looking at a tablature book. And those of you who don't know, tablature books are like a shorthand for music notation, but rather than be the typical staff and the notes you see, it's 6 lines representing the 6 strings of the guitar and numbers representing which fret your finger is supposed to go on. So it's a shortcut way of learning to play guitar, and incidentally, that's how I taught myself. Via Metallica songs. Anyway, sorry, it's true.
Hey, that's what I'm talking about.
Everyone begins somewhere, right?
Yep.
So anyway, in this dream, I am talking to people, and I'm like, I don't know, man, this looks weird. And I'm looking at a tablature book that is black on the cover, completely all black. And it is a Metallica tablature book. And I open it up and I'm looking at it and I'm like, these songs are boring. I kept looking at the cover to make sure it actually was Metallica, because I was like, this just can't be. And at this point, I'd moved to Indiana. 4 years later or so, that album comes out. Black cover, boring as hell. Doesn't sound like them at all. Not the them that I liked as, a middle schooler. Yes, my musical taste had grown, and apparently their budget had grown a lot, and their need to fill their bank account had grown a whole bunch too.
Of course.
But as happens. But yeah, so that one is weird because not only was it a completely prophetic dream that completely came true, but it didn't come true that way. So it wasn't a tablature book that I looked at. I actually, like an idiot, stood in line at midnight to buy that stupid CD or whatever, and I was so disappointed. When I got home, my mom had been asleep, and she was like, "Oh, did you come home?" I'm like, yeah. She's like, "Do you like the album?" I'm like, "I'm not sure. I'm only a couple songs into it." And it's like, okay. And which was, music to her ears. She couldn't stand Metallica, or pretty much any music I listened to. But which it only made me stronger. But that's wild. And so what I saw was a version of reality that was true, but it wasn't true exactly the way that I dreamt it to be true, but it still came true.
Right.
I've had others where it's verbatim. Everything is exactly the same. But when I have those dreams, it is very short and very inconsequential. Like literally, I remember one time looking at, how some schools were built with like cinder block walls. And so like you'd have a classroom and the wall would be like painted cinder block walls.
Yeah.
Seriously, like I'd be looking at that and then I'd look out the window or something like that. And then, a year or 2 years later, I'd be sitting there in class and I'm like, this is that dream I had.
Yeah, that's wild.
And then, but nothing of note that I'm aware of. Maybe there was some alien crash or something that happened halfway across the world at that moment in time. I don't know. But all I know is for me, it was very inconsequential.
I love hearing stuff like that. I don't have prophetic dreams or anything like that I can remember, but I love to hear stuff like that because it's fascinating to me. I don't know. Even, yes, like that and then deja vu. I think those share a lot of like similarities. And I think maybe even deja vu might be something like that as well.
Yeah.
That maybe you dreamt that and you don't remember. I don't know,
Yeah. Well, regardless of when and how it happens, it still seems like a shift of the energy and the consciousness to this other reality, even if it is only for a split second or whatever.
Going back to Dolores Cannon, she says the only reason we're here is to learn how to manipulate energy.